thank you all for joining us today. My name is Martin Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this final webinar of our series, which I think those of you who've been able to come to other sessions will agree has been a fascinating set of discussions and talks. But really today we wanted to use this session to sort of wrap things up and if you like, look to the future. So that's very much the tone of the discussion today, and of course I'm delighted that Irena Baumann is going to do that for us through a talk and hopefully through some discussion and Q&A afterwards. For those of you that don't know, Irena Baumann is a long-standing supporter of Leeds Civic Trust, but more importantly, her background as an architect, founder of Bowman Lyons, and also through her academic work, through her interest particularly in resilience, we thought made her an ideal fit really to round off this series of webinars. So Irena will, I may not say more about her background, I won't say any more myself, but that's essentially why she's here today. Also joined as usual by Claude, who will be facilitating the Q&A and discussion after Irena's finished speaking. So that's in a nutshell what we're planning to do over the next hour or so. So without further ado, Irena, would you like to share the screen and crack on? I will turn my camera off to reduce the clutter on the screen for people, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just going to try and go to the beginning of the presentation. If you can see a big eye looking at you, yeah, right presentation on. So thank you very much, both of you, for inviting me. I have looked at the whole series in pretty much one go over a couple of days. I had the privilege of being able to access all the discussion, and I thought as a body of work, you have done a really amazing job, because this is a topic that is very current and very relevant, and we got enormous amount to learn about it. So I thought I'll start by just recapping the things that I picked up that really stood out for me in the previous sessions. The positives very much, but there are lots of ideas about what we should do. Fabric first, retro first, people first. Affection was mentioned quite a lot, because of our emotional attachment to historic built environment. There were also some negatives, profit first, people overwhelmed by complexity, that came out very much in the Carbon Co-op presentation. It's just so much to understand for people who are not experts, even for experts, that's what to understand. And then the endless action gaps, you know, between what we say or even know we should do and what we're actually doing. And then there was a whole range of tools for change, you know, probably too many to list, but I think some of them are outstanding and very new, so I just want to list them. The lean, green, clean as a methodology, the whole life assessment method, which has been with us for years, but it's just not used still enough. The whole house approach, my home energy planner, that's for people who want to upgrade their homes. Mapping local architects and local materials. I think it was a stunning presentation. I think from Oriel, about when she mapped the materials and local architects and the match between them in the Carnegie libraries. Really beautiful piece of work. Digital twins came up in Rick Lee's presentation, and many other digital tools that engineers are now using. Embodied carbon structure index. No, about 10 years ago, we couldn't really be sure about embedded carbon. Now we have tools to be more sure. Then a lovely presentation from Simon Warner about reforming architectural education, and also CITB and ACB, showing how many training opportunities there are now. And basically, look, that was the kind of the background of work that's being already done. And then a couple of quotations. Now, Hannah Keithley came up with a wonderful concept of think more, use less. It's small, it's beautiful. Now, these are ideas which keep cropping up. Think more, use less, I think, is an absolute necessity. We all should be thinking about this every day. And then Claude was challenging all the way through, and so was Martin. But I picked up one of Claude's questions Claude with an E. Do we do less refurbishment because we don't understand it? And I think this is absolutely the case. I was so pleased when you asked that question, Claude. Now, just to set a context, what I would like to say, which remember, I'm talking about the overall, I'm looking down from above on what's happening. So the first thing I want to do is to debunk the myths, which I feel very passionate about. So myth number one is that retrofit, refurbishment and repurposing is some kind of new knowledge. And I was struck by Paul Monahan's quotation when he said on Costing the Earth program on Radio 4 a few weeks ago, in June I think it was, that wholesale demolition is a 20th century concept. The history of architecture is history of refurbishment and reuse. Now, we only became obsessed with demolition and building new, probably for the last 3 or 4 generations. The other myth is that retrofit is a solution to climate emergency. I think it was Indy Johar from Black Metal Labs who calculated that if we allowed, say, 50K per retrofit per property on average per house, and about 24 million homes in England, we need 1.45 trillion pounds to do a proper retrofit just of homes. And our public debt at the moment this month is 3.3 billion. So you can see the impossibility of the task, even if we wanted to. And then the other myth is, which was repeated by several speakers, and I think once something like this gets out, it becomes the accepted wisdom, and we need to always challenge accepted wisdoms, that 80% of buildings in 2050 will already build. Well, I would like to challenge this because of the sheer displacement that's happening now. This is 2 years ago in Greece. I think there was an estimate that there'll be 5,000 such settlements by 2020. Actually, this was done in 2018, estimating that within 2 years there will be 5,000 settlements of 80,000 people in each. That was in Greece. And if we think that this is happening in very major way, south of Europe, including Italy, of course, as well, we are already having our own refugee camps in England. We're just not talking about it. And there's going to be more and more people needing to move. You know, the huge migration from south to north has already started. It's happening. And we should be planning for it and building for it. And could well be that refurbishment could provide accommodation, but we are not yet sure the new build will also be required. But we should be careful about saying that everything's already built. So, and the other thing that didn't really crop up in previous speakers, I want to pick up things that haven't been mentioned so far. It's our perceptions of old and new. You know, we are so deeply culturally conditioned to think in certain ways. So the first one is that the visions of the urban future are always new. I haven't come across a kind of a major official vision of the future, which was anything but large scale new. Corbusier was already doing this, you know, with his idea that if we all have sun and air, access to sun and air will be happy forevermore. But those visions require complete demolition and starting from scratch. Whereas in terms of visions for haves and have-nots, people who are rich and people who are not rich. The rich are always living in new and gated societies, and the weak are living in very poor and derelict and old districts. And this is very much embedded in our popular culture. You know, these are images from Blade Runner. So those who can left the earth and are living in extraordinary, technologically accomplished modern environments, whereas those who are somehow wanting, somehow inadequate for whatever reason, have to suffer in derelict, rain-drained, leaky environments on Earth. And the same is repeated in Hunger Games. Now, we either don't have imagination, or this is what we really believe, that the future is going to be built for extremely, the capital is on the right, there's the capital where all the wealthy people with all the power live in Hunger Games to excess, to the debauchery of excess, whereas everybody else is living in districts which are basically abandoned neighborhoods full of ruins. So this is also, you know, a little bit of what sits on our minds and certainly politicians' minds when they want to leave a mark on our society. And then the third perception is this of new build policy bias. So we have that on refurbishment, we have rates which are charged on empty properties. I actually seen 2 beautiful pubs in Leeds being demolished, mainly in order to save rates. EPC energy performance certificates are based on fuel costs, not on carbon. If we were based on carbon calculations, and there's a move towards it now, then of course we'll have a completely different picture of how good existing properties are. The perceptions of risks were well covered by everybody. Perceptions of value also mentioned. Perceptions of compromise. Architects quite often think that they won't get, and clients that won't be able to deliver what the client wants unless it's done from scratch. Sometimes it's true, many times it's not. Vanity plays a huge part in the preference for new build. Vanity of architects and clients, I have to say, the Bilbao effect. You know, for about 2 decades, past 2 decades, clients wanted a very new shiny building by a very, very famous architect, which incidentally they can't maintain now. There's some tracking these buildings, and a wow factor. A lack of skills, and I would say not just among building skills, very much consultants as well, and teachers. My God, schools of architecture are short of teachers who know how to teach refurbishment. Lack of know-how, you know, how to actually go about refurbishment, and this is because of separation of disciplines. You know, architects and say service engineers don't like each other. There is actually, you know, there's an academic paper about the dislike between the 2 professions. They just think in a very different way. And I haven't found a school of architecture yet that teaches services in any kind of adequate way. And then globalization, which separated locality, you know, local knowledge, local understanding. Well, it separated us for climate, because you can build the same building with a lift and an air conditioning system, which can be the same anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to address climate. And then also specialization caused this lack of know-how, because things are so highly specialized now. You have to go for every element of the building, has to be sourced from a specialist. And then, of course, we're discounting externalities. So cost of carbon and climate change damage has not come into any of our calculations of cost. And there's also perception that listing status of buildings and conservation areas are very often perceived as barriers to development. I don't think there's anything there that we don't recognize as being part of our daily lives. So I'd like to suggest maybe honesty is the best policy. I like to say this as often as I can in the present time when we're getting so much rubbish pumped into us from every side. We need to be honest, and this applies to professions. We need to acknowledge that there's this new build bias and try to address it and get rid of it. We need to accept that profit trumps everything. You know, there were a number of speakers in previous webinars who showed projects where, according to them, profit wasn't the main objective, but it is, because unless the retrofit or repurposing or reuse doesn't cost any more than new build, it has to be at least either less expensive or cost the same. If it's more expensive, it will not happen. We are on track for 3 to 4 degrees warming, no matter what we officially tell ourselves. It's too frightening, so we don't say it to ourselves, but I think we know that there's evidence that that's true. The climate is changing faster than we have been allowed to believe, because scientists do know that that's happening, but we are protected from that knowledge. I propose here, this is my proposal, that the most compelling case for refurbishment, retrofit, and reuse is climate change. Now, this is our big hope, and this is why we're talking about it right now. This is why Leeds Civic Trust put this series together. It's the right moment for this conversation. The transformation needed is larger and faster than ever seen before. So this is quite difficult to get our minds around, because it's not a question of just meddling with bit here and bit there. We need a massive transformation, and it's bigger than everything that we've ever done on a global scale. So we need to learn how to do that. And we don't have, you know, mechanisms for it. We don't have global decision-making governance. And the other thing is that if we don't succeed, planet will be better off, actually. So there's no big deal for planet. I just want to just substantiate what I just said in pictures, because we are visual people. The top picture is the skyline in 2008 of London. In 2018, it just went on as if nothing changed. So, you know, the massive financial crisis didn't change a thing. And that's because the same type of person, in some cases, the same person, are in charge of the top elite, very privileged, empowered, wealthy. They are really dictating the pace of what is actually happening with our cities and direction of travel in terms of climate change. In terms of nature taking over, I think some of these images are both beautiful and very frightening. Nature is very, very quick to take over. It doesn't take more than 2 or 3 years before it starts decomposing the man-made elements. And even some very creative people, this is Squint Opera, has started producing those beautiful images of what London might look like after it's been abandoned and nature starts taking over. So I'm very optimistic, despite all, I say all these things because I wanted to be, we need to be resilient and we're able to see the size of a problem. Otherwise, we'll just be messing around. But I'm optimistic that we are ready to make the big change because COVID-19 pushed us towards it. We saved almost 2 decades of change, or we moved much faster, we accelerated the change. The Ukraine war, horrendous as it is now accelerating change towards renewable energy in a very effective way. The cost of living crisis means we're going to start living differently with the behavior change. Extreme weather events are stopping this stupid discussion, but no, is there no climate change? I think it's now more or less accepted that there is. And the rapid developments in artificial intelligence and technologies, all of these together are creating a very supportive condition for system change. We are getting ready for it. And the other thing, which is both scary but also very welcomed, is that we no longer have certainty of outcomes. No, there's just too much change. And our lives are too short to absorb it all. We have to relearn it after all. Every generation has to learn from scratch. So there's just so much you can do on catching up. But instead, we need to accept it and we need to work with partial knowledge. Just accept we don't know everything. And that means we need to experiment and prototype and collaborate. Many, many brains trying to resolve every issue. So the future is becoming very distributive and very networked. So we're creating networks of knowledge and pockets of knowledge and experience, and we don't rely on individual institutions to resolve everything. Business and civic society are doing a lot of work. I think Leeds Civic Trust is a fantastic example of that. So now I just want to talk about the 3 pathways. I chose 3, I could have talked about otherwise, but I think are already with us. Somebody else said recently that we cannot have future that we cannot see. So we can imagine, refugee camps, we can imagine floods and weather events because we're having them, but we can't imagine a beautiful world of social justice and everybody having enough to eat because we just don't have it. So we need to try and see what we already have that we can build on. And there are 3 pathways. One is called expert know-how. The second one is tacit knowledge and local action. And the third one is collaboration. And this is all in the context of refurbishment, retrofit, and reuse. The first one, the know-how. I want to talk about a couple of projects which were pivotal in our practice. Each one of you can think of moments in your life where something happened which changed direction of your thinking and you just became a slightly different person. And for us, it happened several times. One of those times was when in 2010, Innovate UK, they just announced a R&D research grant of £100,000 for architects, for engineers, for practitioners to look at whether commercial buildings can be retrofit for climate change. We were not researchers, but we were deeply interested in the subject matter, so we applied, and we were successful twice. And because we were successful twice, we could learn from the first project and then implement in the second. I would say that we have very deep understanding now. We really do. We are at the kind of early adopters of thinking about this. And I think I think Oriel was talking about Ozium. One of the speakers also talked about I think it was Ozium, about the benefits of retrofit for existing buildings. So this is an arts college in a conservation area in Doncaster, empty, and we were looking at a number of research questions. Can this building be retrofit it incrementally, bit by bit, room by room? Does it all have to be in one go? Can climate adaptation also provide better work environment and enhance well-being? Will conservation status impose constraints on adaptation needs? And can this building be adapted through passive means, or do we have to have air conditioning? And how would retrofit impact on commercial viability? I can't tell you how much we learned from this project, but we worked very collaboratively. We had a very big team. We started with bringing experts in. So we had a workshop with many people who've been writing about this for a long time, just telling us how it is. So we started at a very high level. And then we worked with contractors and across different disciplines. And we gave ourselves time. I think it was a year-long study. We spent the first 4 months just getting to know the building, how it operates, the constraints, modeling, really understanding how it behaves. And then we tested what potential adaptations we can have, and we modeled those with Arab. We used results to develop incremental adaptation strategy for each room. And then we tested it through a cycle, through the entire whole life cycle to establish the cost of it. And these are adaptations. These are interesting to read out because they are so simple. You know, it is not some kind of magic, black magic. Thermal mass, amazing. Shutters, fantastic. G-value of glass keeps improving over time. You don't have to be green anymore to have good glass. Reduced glazing. We do need to have less glass for less overheating. Night vents do amazing job. Increased ventilation, key cross ventilation. This is why old buildings are doing so well. They all have cross ventilation. They are magical for that. Lighting is getting better, much less heat. IT is the same. Ceiling fans, 3 to 4 degrees perceived cooling effect. They are incredible. Every hot country has them. We still haven't started putting them in here. We don't have enough ceiling space for them. Old buildings do. And then greening and water, superbly powerful. Again, I think 7 degrees in the last heat wave in Birmingham, the areas with trees were 7 degrees cooler than the center of the city. So very powerful, and also, psychologically. And then albedo effect, which is white, having white paint really helps. This is all known in other hot countries. But what was less known is the anti-adaptations. We discovered that some things we are putting in now, because we think we're doing the right thing, are really bad for changing climate. Having increased densities are not accounted for in the modeling. So we're still working to the idea that average office space has 6 people per 10 meters or something. It's just completely different now. Raised floors and suspended ceilings separate quite often good mass of the building from acting as a heat store, really bad. Legislation, more and more insulation and air tightness is very bad for mental health. We all love to open the window and to regulate our own temperature and to feel the breeze. It's so important to feel the air movement. And then security shutters. There's always a tension between security, wanting to be safe, and wanting to have open windows. So these are anti-adaptation. I can't go through all of this. I just want to very quickly, somebody mentioned adaptive comfort. Yes, of course, we worked with adaptive comfort. We also took the medium projections for 2080. There are now projections for what will happen to climate. Kind of good one, medium one, and the bad one. We took the medium one in 2010. Now we are beyond the high one. So this order has to be updated. We are not doing very well in our projections. And after we collated all of this understanding, we then identified how much benefit each of the adaptations gives us across the warming climate up to 2080. You can see here, each adaptation gives us different benefits. And we then also plotted them room by room to see. These are on the left, on the right, there are all the room numbers, and then each room had a different set of adaptations because it behaved differently. I don't know if anybody knows on the scale that actually the worst overheating is on April on the east-facing facades. I didn't know that until we started modeling, because the low sun just preheats the room and it's horrible. So that's why we should be thinking about it room by room rather than building by the whole building. And then we did the cost estimates, and that was the amazing bit because we didn't know till the end what's going to happen. For each room, we did a cost estimate, and what it showed is that over the life of building was 3.7 million saving from implementing the adaptation from 2010 onwards. It might not be a huge figure, but it shows, economic reason for it. And we didn't even look at carbon at the time. It was just energy. The second project followed, and we asked different questions. By the way, if anybody wants to ask a question now, I'm rattling through so fast, but if there's
Carry on, this is fascinating.
Okay, so Adapt and Save was National Media Museum, completely different building, 60s building. It wasn't the actual museum, it was the library next door to it, 60s building. We asked slightly different questions. We asked the question, can we adopt floor by floor, because there were different tenants in different floors? And can the adaptation provide better environment and well-being? And about the role of client organization, what is responsibility of people who run these buildings? And also, can it be adopted for passive means, because at the moment it's air conditioned, the whole building is conditioned. 12 and 12, this was the existing conditioned, concrete frame, open floor plans, sealed windows, can open a single window, the same windows on the south, the same windows on the north, no difference between them. And then we started doing the same methodology again and suggesting solutions. By 2015, we suggested we should take the windows out and instead put a new facade, which will have operable roof windows, but also opening lights, but on the south facade, not on the north facade. Then by 2035, we suggested we're going to need to add ceiling fans that would be enough to keep the building comfortable. By 2055, which is 40 years later, which is a maintenance cycles, we can take the facade off and then upgrade it, because by then we're frying and we have to install new facade with additional screening and electrically operated louvers, so they can respond to the amount of sun. And this layering we modeled at the time would be sufficient to take us up to 2080 as we knew it then. So the benefits of adaptations we showed were that we don't need mechanical ventilation. All this was done without a single cooler being installed. We could actually take out the mechanical ventilation. We showed that we can reduce the need for cooling. The building stayed cooler for longer. We had significantly lowered life cycle costs, and the capital investment could be done in a very intelligent way by coinciding with maintenance cycles, and maintenance budgets could be thrown into it, and there were also energy savings. So there was a way of generating money to actually pay for this retrofit. But the biggest thing that we found is that the worst anti-adaptation was the organization itself and the potential barriers that they represented. And I would suggest that many estates that we have in this country, large estates of properties, universities, whatever they are, have this problem. This was a museum which is centrally controlled and had 4 other museums. The users of the building were never ever consulted on anything. It was very unhappy staff. The management structure had no structure for decision making whatsoever. The BMS, which is the mechanical system which controls the services, was set for perimeters 12 years ago when it was first installed, and nobody, not a single engineer, came back to check whether these perimeters were still right. Staff areas were not monitored, so staff areas where people rested and recovered from hard work and overheating or being too cold were not monitored, so we don't even know whether they were adequately looked after. The logs that VMS held were used to fix things, so it was showing, if it showed overheating, it was just fixed, rather than a tool for observing, learning, and then planning accordingly. There was no submetering, so the north of a building appeared to be performing the same as the south. Absolutely no knowledge, no understanding, silo responsibilities, no strategy on the targets, no decision making, annual budgeting. So you had to commit how much you're going to spend on maintenance every year. You couldn't plan for 10-year spending. You only had little budgets for each year, and there was no capital investment budget on the project budget. So, and then there was political turmoil constantly. So people, chief executives came and went, and there was just no continuity. Very damning. We never really I did publish the paper many years later when all the individuals left, because it was very damning. So the relevance of these projects, just, I know that it's sort of writing, but it's so important, this sort of learning that it needs to be disseminated. And there's so much relevance in those projects. We're on the one of, I think there are 20 projects like this altogether. So we had empirical evidence that existing commercial buildings are highly adaptable to climate change. We had evidence that building fitted with air conditioning could actually be weaned off. They could be returned to natural climate conditions. We had evidence that commercial viability will actually cost less in terms of whole life cycle costs, whole life costs. Building management was very wasteful of energy and carbon. The buildings can be retrofitted in many ways. It could be room by room, facade by facade. No, we can take the worst spaces first. We can align the maintenance cycles, so there is kind of intelligent budgeting to be done. Current data we discovered was very inadequate. You have to be very wary of data. It's on, models are only as good as the data that goes in. Architects, if they want to be in any way relevant in the future, have to understand thermal modeling. They have to understand how physics, building physics work, and many architects don't understand this anymore. Engineers, I mean, I thought in your talks, engineers were absolutely brilliant. I think that the gap between engineers and architects is growing, and does worry me a little bit. Multidisciplinary teams are needed for climate change strategies, including understanding of future technological developments. So there's so much coming online that we need to understand could become a part of a solution. We can build it into our strategies. Behavior adaptation, I didn't say very much about this, but so much is done by us actually adapting. We don't have to go into the office if it's overheating. We know that now after COVID-19. We didn't know it when we were doing this project, but there are so many things that we can do also in terms of modifying our behavior. And then adaptive thermal comfort is better to ensure successful strategies than the 21 degrees comfort that we have been using for the last few decades. Now, so many of our systems are designed for 21 degrees centigrade, and they're not being changed. BMSs are set to 21 degrees. And all of this breathless run through was without looking at embedded carbon. And this is like the killer, because if we were looking at the embedded carbon, then we would have been even more sure of what we're finding out. So this is one set of projects. The next two are much shorter. The second kind of pathway, which is I feel very optimistic about, is the tacit knowledge and local actions. So a couple of projects. The first one is about to kind of demonstrate local action, and the one is to demonstrate the tacit benefits of tacit knowledge. Local actions in Eastleigh Studio are known to many people in Leeds. It's a trades club building. It was abandoned. Nobody really wanted it. No commercial interest. It's on the edge of impoverished neighborhood, and it's on the edge of A64. Artists could see way beyond this. They loved everything about it from day one. The way it was derelict, the way the sun came in through the dust, the way, most importantly, there was a layer of history on every single wall, and also the way they could engage with it most immediately, because they could do something. They could clear the rubbish as a starting point. It's much more difficult with new build when you have to start digging foundations as your first task. We worked with them, we converted it. This is not about conversion. This is about what happens when people, local communities, start refurbishing buildings that they value. They think they have a value for the place and for society. Through this project, the community of artists grew considerably. They started doing wonderful things. As soon as the building was finished, the artists could stay in the city before there was nowhere for them to stay. And incidentally, there's still a massive shortage of artist studios in Leeds. If anybody has any underused properties, they should be converted them for artist studios. But not only was the culture enriched, this set of people have learned so much about refurbishment. They became, expert clients, and they went on to refurbish many other buildings, not only for studios like Buxton Studios, but also for facilities, ceramic studios, print studios, and a gallery in Chapeltown. They really spread themselves around the city and also beyond the city. They also did many minimal spaces, and lately they have just opened their second arts hostel, again refurbished twice. They refurbished buildings, and twice they started regeneration of the area. Fantastic story about local passion, local understanding, and love of what there is already. So the relevance of this to RRR is that redundant buildings can find use in local organizations, not necessarily developers or national or regional organizations. No commercial interest is actually a very good thing, and marginal location can be very beneficial too, because this is where the learning can happen. Historic use of a public bar, in this case, was of great interest and appeal to this particular user. Now, this was a value that many commercial organizations would not consider as a value. The ability for instant volunteering engagement. You know, the hostels that were built more recently, were driven by artists volunteering. It's absolutely amazing to watch what they can do very quickly. By just moving in and clearing the building and deciding what to keep and what not to keep, and then doing historical research and bringing that research into the artistic expression of the refurbishment. And then development of refurbishment know-how in the artist community has been very empowering, I think, to that community. They now, I think, they refurbished the whole street where the Pride Parade was just last Sunday. So then the second project is Tacit Knowledge, repurposing and regenerating Hebden Bridge Town Hall. It was a community land trust transfer. The local authority didn't want to the town hall. They couldn't maintain it. The local people definitely wanted the town hall, so they bought it. There was a transfer of ownership. But my story is not about that. My story is about how that group of people. There was a listed building. This is a listed building. It was some kind of tram station, and this is the town hall. And when we got engaged, we had masses and masses of consultation. It's a very engaged town. How to build a sort of extension for businesses, and then how to use the town hall. But the general consensus was that the community wanted to create a south-facing riverfront space, because although the river runs through Hebden Bridge, there are many north-facing spaces, access to river, but there isn't a single place by the river where we can access it. So we had to take on the possibility that a listed building will be demolished, and we would never ever have even begun, even conceived of starting participating that kind of effort, if it wasn't for the fact that local people not only understood, not debated the relative values, also debate about it. It wasn't a given. What is more important, heritage or future, future well-being. They were able to convince each other. They were able to convince the diehards who were objecting. They were able to conduct conversation with conservation officers and heritage England at the time called, to explain how we feel, and got for plan permission. And it might be heretical to some people, but I would say that the two other things I want to mention at this point. One is that a very prominent member of Heritage England, when we were doing another project in Hull, it was a grade 1 listed Holy Trinity Church, now a minster. We need to knock the wall through in order to connect it to a new build cafe, and we thought it will never happen. And he said, and I love him for saying it, I can't say who it is, he said, but this is just stonework. And this was somebody from English Heritage, so there's this massive shift when we have to consider whether our values as human, do we continue valuing human human culture more than nature itself, because we are constantly forbidding development on archaeological sites and instead building on green sites, because we think that that's more important than protecting nature. So there's a big debate here. Maybe we can take it up in another series about values of heritage. And anyway, the whole building is built, it's extremely successful only because it is by local people, for local people. And this is what we need to harvest in the future. And the relevance is that it's underutilized buildings are loved by communities. Most community action around built environment starts when something is threatened, a building is threatened, or facility is threatened. This is a huge catalyst for community action. There was no commercial interest again. It helps with the values. Historic use of great appeal to new users. They understood that it's important civic building. Local networks and local knowledge enabled planning permission, including demolition of a listed building. Enhanced facility led to refurbishment of many other buildings. So this organization, one of the most accomplished community land trusts I know of, I had the privilege to work with, they now taken over local cinema and they have built housing, affordable housing, and now we're about to go on site, hopefully with them at some point, building housing for young people, also in Hampton Bridge, all because they know how to do it now. Many other projects carried out since this company has included refurbishment. So the last pathway is collaboration. Museum of Making, different scale building, Silk Mill, Derby. Museum of Making is our biggest project to date, I think. Maybe there's a big one in the office now, but this one was just over 10 million, was more than we ever done before. And what I need to say as a relevant detail here is that we came into that project scarred, literally scarred from a previous experience, also of listed buildings, 5 listed buildings in Huddersfield called Princess Buildings, beautiful buildings, which local authority bought in order to create the offices in there. We did a lovely conversion, very proud of it, no problems there. But this is quick statistics written by the project architect. He was so burned by the time, lots of spelling mistakes here. He said he had 20,000 emails on this job. It was 6 years in the office, 1,200 hours of overtime, 14 to 22 project managers, depends who you regard as being a project manager, because some of them were not managing anything. Lawyers were involved all the way through. 3 times third-party reviews were commissioned by the client to try and find out what on earth is going on, because the project managers didn't. And he still gets, Tom Weiger, he still gets an email every 2 months, he says, 5 years after the job was finished. So we actually considered getting some psychological, some therapy for Tom after this project, because he was so burned out by it. And then the Silk Mill came along, and we had to bid for it. It was just in a feasibility stage. And the reason we bid for it is that it had this magical word in it. It said it's got to be a collaborative process with the client, with everybody, with the community. And we really, 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 really want to be part of it. So this is the original team. This is now, 10 years ago. Long-term clients are like the best. And some of the people actually finished the project, not everybody. Some of them, 1 or 2 are still there. And that's how it all started. A bunch of people, curators, not much experience of buildings. There was 1 professional project manager, building manager, local authority was involved. But basically curators who cared about the, about the building, but mainly about the collection. And we worked with them to create a different kind of museum, which wasn't just about dusty old industry, but very much about making, the beauty of making, the tradition of making, the potentials of making. So in that sense, it was just a standard museum project, but not in terms of process. So they took the time, the whole thing took 10 years. And we need to take a long time to develop methodologies like this. So we started with phase 1, which was just a small project to prototype the methodology. So people were invited through open invitations, local people, to come and help curate the collection. Which parts, which collection items are important to us, and how should they be presented, in what kind of groupings, what kind of relevance. And people came, a lot of people came and did this work. Lots of workshops, cross-generational, and these are, Rolls-Royce engineers sitting with their grandchildren, debating ideas for some furniture. Cross ethnicity and cross-gender as well, quite a lot of females involved compared to other types of construction project. Again, we're trying to find out how it works, what it works, for whom does it work. And of course, Derby has this privilege of having a lot of fantastic engineers. So when we had workshops, we were really, really getting some wonderful designs done. There was a lot of know-how in the room. And out of this, a few items were selected for prototyping and made in the local workshop. So there's a workshop in the museum, and before we even refurbished it, there was already making going on. Steve Smith, who runs the workshop, is phenomenal. You know, he has taught a generation of people how to make things. So the kind of training and collaboration is going across the whole board. You know, it was about collection, it was about designing, and about making. And then a lot of things were made, and the first phase was fully furnished by this collaborative work. And then there was a bit of a break because we applied for big money, didn't get it, had another year. In that year, we perfected, the client perfected the methodology for collaboration. They wrote it up. That became, you know, copied by other museums as well. So although we didn't do any work, we actually did a lot of thinking. And then the question was asked, we had to compete again. Second time, we also got the project. And one of the reasons we got the project is that we were asked, how would we continue this collaboration when it goes into site work? You know, it's a very different thing when you start getting involved with big money and big contractors. And at the time, Arab are very important people in my life. Somebody sent me information about this new contract called Integrated Project Insurance Contract that just appeared. And so you might want to have a read, IPI, just see what it says. And it took me about 2 weeks to actually trace the person who put this thing together. It wasn't obvious. And I went to the City of London, around the corner, big city. I've never been in an insurance building in the City of London before. And somewhere on the 20th floor, there was this little office with 3 people who devised this contract. Brilliant people, all from construction industry, who were completely fed up with how we are working, always in conflict, always losing fees and money and resources. 25% on average of money is lost in disputes on average capital project. So we invited them to Silk Mill. We had many meetings with the client. We debated whether it's a good thing or bad thing. Anyway, the client was enamored and they took them on. And we did the whole project under IPI conditions. When we chose the contractor, they already done a project in this system. They were absolutely brilliant. We chose the contractor not by tender. It was a tender, it was a competitive process, but contractor had to spend the day playing games with us, team games, which were assessed and evaluated. And it's incredible. I would dare anybody on this call to try and go for a team working workshop. It's humbling, to say the least. We are all very different from what we think we are, and some very unexpected characteristics, some very lovely things come out of people which are underappreciated. Anyway, I'm going on, but so the collaboration continued, you know, for 20 months or 24 months, it continued. The meetings got bigger and bigger and bigger. The feature of IPI is that there's hardly any paperwork, no minutes to speak of, no filing. There's no point, because the principle is that the key members of the team, that's the client, the contractor, the main subcontractors, and the main consultants, engineers, architects, service engineers, all and QSs, all form a single team we call Alliance. The Alliance has a board. On the board sits representative of each of the companies, and that whole board and the project is insured with a single insurance, which includes 12 years of latent defects. So there's absolutely no point keeping any records of who said what, because nobody's going to sue anybody. This is a collective effort, collective responsibility. But you do have many meetings, because all decisions are informed by people's views. We need expertise of everybody around the table to make decisions. I won't show you the project. I'll just tell you an example of the kind of decisions we had to make. Ceilings were supposed to be like this, and one of the earliest savings, because we basically monitored the cost every month, and if we were beginning to lose money, we instantly had to find a saving collectively. And the first saving was ceilings, which I was very unhappy about, but I was totally overruled, and I think correctly so. And so most of the spaces don't have suspended ceilings. I think it's disputable. It's a subjective thing whether this is a bad thing or a good thing. This is a whole cooling plant in one of the rooms, which is completely visible. Some people would love it. Some people say it's just too much going on. It conflicts with the exhibition itself. But at least there's a collective effort. collective decision reached after a lot of debate, thoughtful debate. Just wanted to show you this because it's very funny, because there's no need for any kind of extensive communications. This is how Tom did his snagging. He simply sent a whole bunch of photographs to the guys on site to show them where the electrics have to move because they were not in the right place. Quite a few shortcuts like this all the way through. And then, of course, at the end of the process, all the way through the construction site, there were volunteers coming to site, helping with different parts of the construction, all the way through, with the brickwork, with all sorts of different things. And some of them, commented later about what it meant to them and their business, having that kind of engagement, a huge civic benefit. So in terms of relevance of that kind of way of working for the future of retrofit and refurbishment, I would say that we managed to reverse design process. That's something that people are beginning to say now, that we need to reverse the design process. We have to start with understanding exactly what we've got, spending time to get to know not just the building, but also what skills have we got, what materials have we got. That's why I love that map so much of materials and local architects, and really understand what we can build on. And we need to invest time. I don't think our RIBA plan of works pays any attention to that kind of issue. And then we should have time for prototyping, which should be paid for because it actually saves a lot of time later on and money. And we engage volunteers and explore options because they bring so much tacit knowledge with them. We need time to develop a collaborative method. It doesn't come easy, it's just against the grain. And for architects, it's really difficult to be collaborative because we just want to deliver all the time. We just want to have a program and we want to measure the program, and all that sitting around the meetings when we think actually we know the answers while we're listening to all these people. We really have to learn how to be a bit different, and this has to start in school, and it's not happening at the moment. Professional expertise and tacit knowledge are brilliant, bring the two together. We have so much to add as experts, so much value to bring, but we need to mix it in with the tacit knowledge. Design informed by history, historical value, and construction expertise is better design. It will last longer and it's more sustainable. Informed cost decisions, just to give you a little example, because such a lovely example. At some point, we wanted the roof to be re-roofed left to right because it was better for the program. And the subby said, well, okay, we want 20,000 more if you want this doing. And we said, why? Why is it 20,000 more? So, well, because all the roofers are right-handed. And if you ask them to work left to right, they're going to be so much slower. They have to work right to left. And no, I challenge an architect to know this kind of detail. I've been practicing for 40 years. I didn't know this. Had problems resolved very quickly and collectively. COVID was amazing. How we worked through COVID. When that hit, we were on site during COVID. It was extraordinary. The contractor who had 20 other contracts on site was instantly marred by claims, endless claims by client, by subbies on other jobs. On this one, we just got on with it and we finished it. Community ownership was built through the engagement at each of the stages. I just want to say it's not all wonderful. For example, there was a decision made, which again I was very against, but this time I was right and everybody was wrong. It was the boiler. We had air source heat pump in the project. It was decided to save money, it was only £50,000 to put a gas boiler in instead. That decision cost the scheme about £75,000 in the end, because we had to put a huge flow in because there was no gas supply adequate for it, blah, blah, blah. We did a very quick decision, very bad decision. And of course now, as soon as the building's finished, the gas prices are going through the roof. So I am so unhappy about the decision. It's one of those things that will hurt me for many, many years to come. So I'm going to take my breath now, stop running, and just want to sum up. This is the slide that maybe we can discuss. I try to sum it all up on one slide. If you look at the diagram, first of all, this little blue diagram, innovation, adaptation life cycle goes in a bell curve. You start with like true innovators, people who invent new possibilities. And then you had early adopters. I don't think that any of us here in the room on previous series were true innovators. No, I don't think any of us invented something like an iPhone or, but we are early adopters, all of us. Everybody I've heard on this series, including you who created this, are early adopters. You want to promote new ideas, and that's extremely valuable, because without us, we will never get to the early majority. And then suddenly, things start changing, and then the change happens very quickly. And this is the source of my optimism. I think we've been building up knowledge for a long time with early adopters, and all these wonderful tools that everybody was talking about. We have them now. We have the knowledge. So I think change can happen very quickly. So your whole webinar series is very timely and very relevant. I think it will help the experts understand the direction of travel. I think we should be shamelessly pushing this webinar series at professionals, encourage them to tweet about it, whatever it takes to encourage them to not just maybe tweet quotations from what people said. They're so good, some of the things that are being said, so that people pay attention, that it exists online, they can listen to it. It will help us understand how we can make a positive difference. Existing buildings are essential ingredients of cultural identity. It's a no-brainer. They are important. A lot of Earth's resources are embedded in them, in this building stock. So we should use it to redefine the relationship between people and the planet. We have to redefine how we work with the planet, and preserving what we already built is by far the best starting point. There is much to be done, and all those participating in this series are the early adopters in this cycle of adaptation, and we are all doing our best to be part of the solution rather than the source of the problem. So I have finished now.
Have you got a glass of water?
I've got coffee. Yes.
This was amazing. This was really amazing, and I love the way you did it through narrative. I mean, I suspect that some of the people who are watching this will find it very difficult to understand everything, because they don't know how fragmented the construction industries are at this stage, and how difficult it is to do the slightest bit of communication between one party and another.
Yes.
The audience has been left completely silent. There isn't one question from the audience. Martin, would you like to get started with the questions? I have a lot of questions, and I'll have to measure.
There is a question, a comment actually, just to say thank you for this series of webinars, and we don't need to know everything, but an overview is really useful. I mean, I thought that was a really good overview and a really good sort of rounding off of the different things that we've heard over the last 6-7 weeks. So I think, for me, there were a couple of things that I thought were particularly interesting. So could I just maybe chip in with one, and then I'm going to let Claude carry on, because I know you've got lots of questions you want to ask and lots of points you want to make. But something I hadn't really thought about, and you illustrated this, Irena, with the example in Bradford, was the idea of, almost incremental improvements to a building, but looking at a very long, time span, looking at a 50-year time span, and how a building might adapt over a period of 50 years, and the changes that you need to make over that 50-year period to address climate change, and the likelihood that the temperature will rise, and by 2080, things will be possibly be unbearable. It's pretty unbearable today, actually, but goodness knows what it will be like in 50 years' time. I thought that was a really interesting, to express it in those terms. I thought was really interesting, and I think that was something that I hadn't thought about before, particularly.
It makes it easy, in times of shortages of money, of effort, but actually, it doesn't all have to be done wholesale. When you build, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to build a little bit and then add a little bit. Whereas old buildings are very well, they can be done piecemeal. They always have been.
I was amazed to discover that the notion of adaptive comfort, which is exactly that, which is that it isn't just the weather that causes the building to fluctuate, but it is also the occupants. density, activity, personal circumstances, or whatever that dictate what degree of comfort you have. This has been discovered and quantified by mechanical and electrical engineers, which you would have thought was counterintuitive. You would have thought that this was against their interest to investigate this. And instead, they have done a huge amount of beautiful work about the way that people actually need to be able to locally control their own environments.
Yeah, and also in a week of hot weather, we can actually, throughout the week, we adapt to the rise in temperature. So if we could be in an office which is 30 degrees hot on the last day of the heat wave, because we adapted to it, but on the first day, if it was 30 degrees straight away, we'll find it extremely difficult. So we actually adapt quite quickly to changes, both ways.
And it doesn't need to be technologically very advanced either. I mean, all you need to do is go to places like Granada, where you get snow in winter and extremely heat in summer. And the windows have got sometimes 5 or 6 different layers for people to just adjust the temperatures, nighttime, daytime, winter, summer, etc. A lot of it could actually be reinventing the wheel, and a lot of it can be quite cheap, but it requires maintenance, which is an absolute no-no these days.
I can see some questions coming in.
Aha!
Yeah.
So there's a question here about managing differences of opinion over decisions that have been made if there are no minutes taken, if nothing is noted. How is that sort of handled?
Well, we did sort of take bullet points, but they're always absolutely useless, and nobody ever volunteered to write them. So, there were, I mean, we had also part of the alliance is that you had this stuff. You create a charter, you create a joint charter of how you're going to behave, and that's done by the whole team, the wider firm, and that is kind of pinned up on walls in different rooms on site. And we are kind of self-regulating that if somebody acts unkindly, for example, or if somebody obstructs the majority decision but just being constantly annoying, then that is not the right behavior. So there was always, so group dynamic, which dictated that if on the whole majority is satisfied with action, that action needs to be taken. It left people very bruised quite often. I gave you the example of the boiler because I was bruised by it. And I really believed it was the wrong decision, and I was unable to turn the room around. I was trying to do the 12 Angry Men stuff and just turn the room around and just failed. So it's not, I don't mean to do with, I'm not taking notes. It's to do more with how the ability to argue your point and how long you get, because no agendas were always very long, and we couldn't spend the entire meeting on one item. We had to move on. So there was always a bit of a pressure to say, okay, we just got to make the decision. We had our conversation, we had our discussion, we've got to make a decision now. And then the key decisions were they were noted. But fun enough, there's no note on the decision to change the boiler, because it wasn't seen as the most important one of them all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a comment here really from Fran in Birmingham, Fran Wild, who just says, great presentation. Impressed with the emphasis on involving the knowledge and lived experience of everyone who will be involved in and affected by a retrofit, and also having them informed by experts from the construction industry. I think I agree with that. I think that's a really important point. Yeah. Claude, anything else from you?
There is something that you have touched on, and which cropped up very often throughout the entire series. And it is this element of our attitude towards older buildings. I loved the reference to Blade Runner. I actually did an experiment one week when I kind of went through a number of science fiction films and realized that, yes, it was always the poor deprived people tended to be in the old buildings, and the rich villains were always in the glitchy, beautiful buildings. But there is the fact that all these things were known in the 70s. they didn't come to me in my childhood as I was growing up, but you know, we did have the Lorax, we did have Silent Spring, we did even have architects like Mike Reynolds or site architects who he tried to play against the system, and this didn't change anything, and yet this time feels different.
Yeah, because of carbon. No, it is. It is.
Is it because of the immediacy of the danger?
I honestly think it's because embedded carbon. I think embedded carbon changes the equation exponentially. It was never ever taken into account before. That, you know, because construction industry uses so much resource and energy and produces so much carbon, we have to find ways of reducing the rapid ways. And one of the most obvious one is to keep the carbon where it is already spent, you know, in existing fabrics. So all the tools that we use for assessing also our wisdoms, which are all attached to new build, will be turned upside down when we start including carbon as a measure of success. So I think this is the beginning of a major return to refurbishment, absolutely major.
Yeah, it's interesting they had to devise the calculation systems in order, because I mean it was always by way of common sense, something that did stack up together, but the quantification system is very useful to prove the point.
Well, it's, yeah, we live in a society that has to be numeric. No, we have to evidence everything. So just because it's obvious and tacitly understood, intuitively understood, doesn't wash with the kind of, you know, cultural perceptions. You know, they completely trump the tacit knowledge, and that's why we need some tools like those carbon structure, embedded carbon indexes, but also now I'm waiting to hear that government's considering abolishing VAT on refurbishment. And when is that going to happen? This is going to be another, you know, complete change maker when we don't have to pay 20% extra for wanting to keep a building.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, I guess, you know, the sort of not shadow, but you know, the cloud hanging over this is what governments can and cannot do, what they will and won't do to make these options more attractive than the alternative. And I guess, you know, the VAT example is one of those, but there are many others where, you know, public investment or choices made by governments or local authorities, for that matter, can make a difference in whether a building is frankly saved or not saved, whether it's considered to be worth the effort, or whether it's considered to be easier to put something else in its place. And I think that's something that I suspect we'll be seeing a lot more debate on in the next few years. Yeah,
but we also have the civic society and businesses themselves, which are becoming very powerful advocates of change.
Yes.
And you know, I think we probably can't look to policymakers for everything, because they are so out of touch. They are so out of touch with the emergency of it all. They bicker, this bubble of bickering. They only see each other in very tiny little constituencies. So this is probably not the answer. It would be very helpful. They could, what Joe Biden has just done in America. And it would be so nice to have something like this here happening. But meanwhile, we're building up the knowledge. So I think that, you know, the change is happening already. So why? Now, I want to ask you a question. Why did you put this series on right now, this summer? You didn't know.
That's you. It was Claude's idea, so I'm going to ask Claude.
Well,
I mean,
actually,
we've been discussing it for a little while. So the timing is probably, you know, we could have done it slightly earlier in the year, but I'll let Claude answer the question.
Yeah. I mean, I did a PhD many years ago to look at adaptability at walls and windows, and it was incredibly difficult. Even embodied carbon didn't exist at the time, but I went through history and developed an increasingly keen interest in how older buildings work. Not necessarily in the sense of heritage, but in the sense of things that they did which were very simple that we're not able to do anymore. And a couple of years ago, the society, Society for Architectural Historians put together a symposium where they asked all their historians to give examples of sustainability in the history of architecture. And so everybody came up with reuse of local materials, using natural local resources, socioeconomics in the local area. And it just made it sound very obvious and like something we'd always known. And this is what's prompted me to start looking again into the whole way that we look at old buildings. And of course, a lot of things have happened. As you say, as a consequence of COVID, I think Extinction Rebellion also had a role to play in our cultural shift. I think, yeah, 5 or 6 years ago, whether it's Brexit, COVID, or the cumulative factor, I think the world is ready to stop going by those great formulas and go back to a much more intricate, but also, I think, enjoyable way of working.
Yeah. Enjoyable is a good word. Yeah.
Look, I think we probably
We're
are
done.
reaching the end of our time here, Irena and Claude. But I really enjoyed that session, and I know that we're getting a lot of views on that on our YouTube channel, and I'm sure we'll be getting lots of views on this particular webinar. So I'd just like to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it on a hot summer's day.
Yeah.
Thank you for those who've listened in today and those who will be listening in when we produce the video of this event. This isn't the final word on this subject, clearly. It's our attempt to start a conversation of perhaps in Leeds, but hopefully more broadly, people are interested in what they've heard over the last 7 weeks. But I'm sure it's a topic that we'll be coming back to again and again. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the summer, and we'll no doubt meet again in various guises before too long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Bye, Irena. Bye.
Oh, thanks.